All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jeff Hunt. I'm the Director of LabX here at the National Academy of Sciences. Welcome to our monthly SciEngage discussion series. I co-host this with Emily Cloyd from AAIS Center for Public Engagement. Say hello, Emily.
Hello.
One day we'll get Emily a camera too. So this month we have a discussion centering around the 2019 Advancing Informal STEM Learning PI meeting, as well as the Center for Advancement of Informal Science Education staff. So I'm just going to stop talking and turn it over to Melissa and Jamie and let them go. Just so everybody knows, this is being recorded, so you're on the air, and go ahead.
Hello, and thank you, Jeff and Emily, for inviting us to share on this SciEngage event this month. I'm Jamie Bell. I'm the project director and principal investigator of the Center for Advancement of Informal Science Education. We're based here in DC at the Association of Science and Technology Centers.
Hi, and I'm Melissa Ballard. I'm the communications and community manager at CAISE.
And we're also joined by our co-principal investigator at the University of Pittsburgh. I'll let him, there he is waving, Kevin Crowley. Say hi, Kevin.
Hi, Kevin.
So Kevin and Melissa and I also work with three other staff members and 3 co-PIs at universities around the country. It's great to see you all joining us. Recognize a lot of names who are on the virtual discussion today. So we hope that what we share will be useful, and we welcome questions all along the way, obviously. And hi, Paul. And at the end, we'll definitely have some time for some big theme type of questions. But please use the chat as Jeff and Emily have in the past to post any questions as they occur to you, and we will try to attend to them. So we do have some slides, and the focus of what we're going to talk about today is through the lens of the PI meeting, the principal investigator meeting that we hosted back in February here in the DC area. And we're going to try to use that event as kind of a lens into some of what we do, but also a lot of what happened there has some outputs that may or may not be useful to your work. Hopefully it is. You pick and choose. But we're happy to follow up with any specific questions about pieces of the meeting that you might have further interest in. So we'll go to the slides, I think, now, and hope everybody can see them once we share. Okay. Can everyone see the slides? Okay. If you have any issue.
Says they're still loading.
Okay. Sorry. We'll wait. Thank you. Are they there? Okay.
No.
Okay. Well, I will, in the interest of time, I will keep talking a little bit and say that I'll be, we'll be co-presenting today, that is to say Melissa, Kevin, and myself. We are speaking from CAISE, which is the resource center for the Advancing Informal STEM Learning Program at the National Science Foundation, but that we don't actually represent NSF. We're not part of NSF, and it's important for us to clarify that because we have a cooperative agreement with the National Science Foundation. Some of you have been maybe involved in those type of grants in the past. And so we work very closely with the NSF AISL program, but we are not NSF ourselves. Right? How are we doing slides-wise?
We see them.
Oh, great. Okay. So, yeah, so that's the disclaimer about us not being NSF. The function of a resource center is to mostly support the principal investigators and projects that are funded by that NSF program, and in this case, the Advancing Informal STEM Learning Program. There are other resource centers you may be aware of in the Division of Research and Learning in informal environments. Cadre is one, Stellar, Circle. There are others that aren't in DRL, like Evaluate. Anyway, the NSF funds some really useful resource centers that have tools and resources that you can use in developing proposals and also just in supporting your work in general. Okay, we'll move on. So just to clarify, what we mean by informal STEM learning. So it's an ever-growing, widening field of sectors or settings in which people encounter STEM. This is a list that we typically work from, but you're probably familiar with a lot of these types of settings: botanical gardens and nature centers, cyber learning and gaming, events and festivals, making and tinkering spaces, media of all types. We sometimes say transmedia. Parks and nature centers, libraries, of course, is a rapidly growing a setting where STEM is happening, STEM learning is happening. I don't see the slide anymore.
It's not. Kevin's going to share them from his computer.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. Anyway, you get a sense of the range of the. Is that better? Okay, there we go. Of the range of type of settings we mean by informal STEM. Okay, move on. Next slide, please. Okay, and the main place that we, resource where we capture everything we do, including the PI meeting documentation, any convenings we do, workshops, resources that we curate, collect for use by people in the field as they develop projects and proposals, live on informalscience.org.
Can you guys see Kevin's screen still? Sorry, this is turning into a tech nightmare.
It's all over the place. It's either too large or just portions of it. If he doesn't go into slideshow mode, it shows, but as soon as he goes into slideshow, it gets too big.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay.
So Kevin, can you take it out of slideshow mode?
So I think I do have it out of slideshow mode. Can you see this now?
Yeah, I can't see the whole slide, Kevin.
Wow.
I
Okay.
only see portions of it. I can kind of scroll around and see it, but not. I don't know if anybody else is having that problem.
Well, we are too. So
No problem here.
Hey, Melissa, maybe we should post the link to the slides so folks can just follow along in Google Slides.
Yeah, I think we can do that.
would that be okay, Jeff and Emily?
Yeah, I think that's the best option, and just escape, get out of the presenter mode so it doesn't have these formatting issues.
Yeah, just make sure that the slides are available for whoever has the link rather than having a specific account.
Chat. Just, we've got some extra slides in there that we're not going to reference while we're talking, but they're just extra notes that hopefully will be helpful for you.
Okay. So hopefully that improves things.
Yeah. I see people joining, so that looks successful.
Okay, which one are we on after this? Yeah.
So we're going to go to new charge.
Yeah. So thank you for your patience here. So with our new funding of this award that CAISE has to be the resource center for AISL, we had an expanded charge to link and connect more to other related fields of activity that many of you are involved in. What is alternately referred to as public engagement with science, engagement, science communication, outreach, a lot of activities that go by different names but often have a lot of overlap. And of course, the AISL program has and continues to fund projects that would identify as those types of projects and hopes to in the future. So this time, the program was more explicit about that connection to particularly science communication and an acknowledgement that there's a lot of knowledge sharing that could happen across the fields. Early on, we did a couple of baseline studies that helped form what we know about the current state of connectivity between the fields, and those are available on our website. Not going to talk about it here, but really, it was interesting for us in terms of getting started on the work this time to know that there are a number of people that sit at the boundaries of the fields and identify equally, sometimes in many, and for example, attending conferences, doing presentations, writing for publications. But of course, there is still a fair amount of siloed activity that could be better connected.
Excuse me, could you tell us when you're advancing when we should go to the next slide? We don't know where you are in the presentation.
Right. Okay. So
So we're going to skip to slide 13 next. Yeah, so you can go ahead and talk about the PI meeting itself.
Okay. So I'm gonna shift to talking about the PI meeting, which was in February here in DC, and it was about 250 PIs of 275 or so projects from, again, across different sectors of informal STEM learning. I need to see this.
Oh, sorry.
And the thing that I think is probably the most useful thing to say and interesting about this meeting is that, as you saw from the different sectors previously, people work in settings where there are particular communities of practice around, say, zoos and aquaria, what have you. And they would go to a conference that would be, AZA, Association of Zoos and Aquaria, or the Association of Science Technology Centers conference, or if you're in media, you might go to SMASH at WGBH in Boston every couple of years. But the thing that's interesting, one thing that's interesting about this meeting is that people from across sectors come to one meeting to compare notes, share learning, share research, share challenges and questions about how they go about their work and how it's being informed by research, evaluation, and what they're learning just in the process of implementing these projects. So this PI, we hadn't had one for 3 years, so there were a lot of new PIs this time. I think you probably know that on an annual basis, the AISL program funds around 40 new projects. That doesn't include supplements and things like eager grants, but it's a highly competitive program. So it also means that the projects come, very highly vetted by peers. It's a peer review process to be funded, and so it makes for an interesting mix. And this time at the PI meeting, we were able to invite some members of task forces that were specifically invited to bring the science communication and public engagement perspective to the meeting around some of the common challenges that the fields face. Jeff and Emily are among members of task forces who were involved in this meeting, and we hope to do more of that in the future. But I just want to point out that, of course, as a PI meeting is a required meeting for those who are funded by the AISL program. It's not an open conference that anyone can come to. But we are charged with, CAISE is charged with really trying to spread any knowledge that's shared there and any outputs and potential implications for the fields writ large to partake of in your own work and development. Thank you. The themes this year, we don't really have a theme, an explicitly stated theme for the meeting, but certainly in our efforts to reflect the portfolio of funded projects by AISL, the AISL program, there were some themes that rose to the top. We always do a pre-meeting survey asking PIs what issues they're dealing with, what their biggest challenges are, what they would like to see discussed, directions they see the field going in, and create, in this case, I mentioned that CAISE has task forces, and those are made up of mixed groups of informal STEM education folks and science communication and engagement professionals. The task forces worked in particular areas to create some resources that we could share at the meeting, and uses tools to kind of catalyze some of the discussions that happened there. Those were, some of these were launched at the meeting. We'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But those are now available on the website for anyone to use, thanks to the National Science Foundation's funding of the production of those. So the constructs of identity, interest, and engagement in STEM were themes that kind of pervaded the meeting in different ways. They were touched on by our keynote speaker, Dr. Naila Nasir from the Spencer Foundation, whose own research delves deeply into how these constructs are important for learning, and I highly recommend her work. And of course, there's a video of her talk on the CAISE website, on the informalscience.org website PI meeting page. There was also a concurrent session on this topic. That there's a list there of, we moved on to the slide with the concurrent sessions. And those are the topics that, again, from a survey, a pre-meeting survey we did at PIs, where topics and approaches to work that were considered important, that rose to the top. We made space for concurrent sessions to occur around these topics, and they were led by PIs. So PIs themselves, AISL-funded PIs, offered to lead them and invite colleagues who are working in similar areas to lead discussions on these topics. So that's a list. If you, again, on the PI meeting page, there is a slide. There are some slides that also capture the high-level themes that were discussed in each one of these concurrent sessions, as well as some links to resources that were shared in those sessions if you have particular interest in those topics. So I know there's like 14 things there, so I'm not going to read them, but just so you know kind of what was discussed. Now, again, these were programmed because we did this pre-survey, and we worked closely with the program officers too to identify projects in the AISL portfolio that could contribute constructively to these discussions. Anything in the chat? Okay. Then we always leave also some space on the last day of the meeting for people to nominate open space sessions, as to say, it's not a full open space conference, but we do use the spaces that we use for the concurrent sessions for topics that people really want to discuss that we're not already programmed into the meeting, and give a couple of days for these to emerge. People nominate them through a process, and then those who really wanted to lead these discussions pitch them over lunch the day of the open space sessions. So these were some of the ones that came up this year. One that was particularly highly rated from our evaluation and attended was the one that revisited the Learning Science and Informal Environments publication from the National Academies Press, which any of you who worked in this field know was the first real consensus volume that spoke to the evidence around how learning happens in informal settings, what the learning strands, possible learning strands are, and among those are interest and identity, for example. And it had been 10 years this year since that publication first came out, and some people who were involved in the committee who wrote that first consensus report were at the meeting and led a session where we kind of revisited where the fields are in relation to that now. And some of the other topics will probably be not surprising to you working in these fields. We don't have documentation of those particular sessions per se, but if you were interested in following up with those who led them, you can contact CAISE and we can make a connection for you. We'll move on now. So one of the things that we did in terms of an interactive session with the whole group was to share some tools at the meeting that we had developed up to the meeting, prior to the meeting and up to the meeting, to be shared there. And one was around the other big theme of the meeting, which was broadening perspectives on broadening participation in STEM. This is a topic that I mentioned our baseline studies. earlier, and it was a topic that definitely we learned something about in surveying people from across informal STEM education and science communication as to what is known, what needs still to be studied about approaches to broadening participation. And a task force on broadening participation spent some time really working through what some of the issues are. Melissa was a member of that task force, and I'm going to turn it over to her now to explain some of that process.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, and just heads up too, we wanted to dig in a little bit to two of the task forces because we did work with those materials at the meeting. So Kevin's also going to talk a little bit about the interest, identity, and engagement stuff after we talk about one of the briefs for this toolkit. Yeah, so I had the pleasure of actually serving on the task force before I changed jobs to CAISE last May. But kind of similar to the task forces, it brought together folks who were both in the ISE field, but also perhaps more traditionally identify in public engagement or in SciComm. And so moving to slide 20, we started off with a sort of big charge of just mapping the current needs and efforts around broadening participation in STEM in both fields. And we didn't have a strong sense of what stuff we would actually create at that point. So we got together a few times over about a year and a half. The first kickoff was actually at the Aztec conference, the Science Center conference in 2017 in San Jose. And out of that, we came up with some key obstacles. So on slide 21, we've got those mapped. And so the first of things that we thought was really sticky for a lot of folks in the field, both at the national level and the local level, is even starting off with a narrow definition of STEM. So relating to broadening participation because they're thinking about all the ways that STEM and science and engineering and technology show up in everyday people's lives. So if we're only talking about a particular type of goal, particular endpoint, particular type of practice, we're really narrowing what lots of people and diverse peoples might find interesting about STEM and STEM disciplines. The second was dominant cultural norms, which is kind of jargony term, and that's actually the one we wanted to dig into a little bit on this call. But sort of roughly just about that we are all in a culture, whether it's organizational, whether it's our backgrounds or where we come from, and there's certain ways of behaving, interacting with people, ways that behavior gets rewarded that are unspoken, sometimes unseen, but certainly govern the way all of us interact with each other as humans. So we wanted to dig a little bit into what that looks like in STEM context, both in practice and research, to try to identify those and think about how those might impact the efforts we have in designing learning programs, designing events or outreach festivals, things like that. The third one was around our definitions of, we're not thinking holistically about a STEM learning ecosystem, particularly in the K through 12 and informal science space. It's been kind of a hot issue to talk about. We have schools where we're thinking about kids learning, but also they, learn with their families, they learn out of school time. There's all these other cultural institutions that can support that learning where both kids and families go. So we certainly wanted to start there, but also we're thinking about all learners of all ages, also preschool, also young adults, also adults, and families as units. Where do they go to learn and get information and help make decisions? And that really aligns with our kind of new charge from NSF to bridge ISE and SciComm and the public engagement space. And then lastly was about systemic issues. So also the larger level of, again, coordination and people talking to others across sectors, but also at an institutional level. I think what a lot of us maybe have observed is that there's usually one or two people who are really into diversity and equity, and they might try to put forth initiatives or change practices at their institutions, but without sort of a leadership buy-in, that can be really difficult for lasting change. So those are our 4 key obstacles, and from that, moving on to slide 22, we ended up developing sort of a broad range of a toolkit. And there's a longer report where we kind of lay out all the issues, connect to some examples. There's a conversation guide because the rest of the toolkit was really about our audience, thinking out like institutional leaders or people who are maybe you're a director of education, a director of outreach, you play some leading role in your organization and you're in a position to train staff to redesign a program. Like you have some power to do stuff, but you're looking for tools to help start those conversations with people, with your colleagues, with coworkers, with staff, and sort of concrete ideas of how you might move forward. So out of that, we have 11 briefs. And so these are all kind of discussion tools you could hand out at a meeting and, again, talk among colleagues and coworkers. So there are 4, moving on to slide 23, that we thought this audience might be most interested in. Again, there's 11 total. We like to think we selected topics that, you know, people in all sectors would find interesting. And you can, there's a bit.ly there at the bottom if you want to access the full toolkit. So today we wanted to kind of bring up some of the issues in the cultural norms of STEM. So I'm going to go to slide 24. And so we're curious to hear a little bit, you know, in the times that we've been doing some piloting, we did some workshops. We should have like a session on inclusive SciComm. Just the term cultural norms is kind of jargony, and we're curious kind of before we dig in if folks have heard of this term before, if they've thought about it, if that brings up any immediate reactions. So you can share in the chat, or I think pop on video and unmute your audio.
And just to say that also that this was one of the, as Melissa said, we used some of the briefs at the PI meeting, and this was one of 3. And in our evaluation, we found that people, at least at the meeting, found this one the most immediately engaging of the 3 that we shared that day. And they were shared in a full meeting session where we had tables arranged such that there were researchers and practitioners broadly defined at the same table, mixed groups of researchers, practitioners, and evaluators at tables to see what kind of professional learning kind of discussions could happen in a setting like that with that kind of a mix.
So we had a comment from Caitlin in the chat, which I think y'all can see there. And she says the use of just, you know, the term norm seems problematic because it can be othering for others, for anyone who is perceived or perceives themselves as not meeting that norm. And so that's kind of exactly what we're talking about. But the difficult task of, you know, let's say you're onboarded at a job and like there's standards of behavior, there's sort of practices for collaborating, but there's also a lot of things that, you know, are not articulated either by an organization or by people themselves. So what we wanted to highlight for both fields. So a sort of expanded definition of this. So what we're talking about again is accepted patterns of practice, standard ways of speaking, learning, and participating, working. And that specifically when we're talking about the US context, of course, this is going to be different for different geographical regions and certainly other countries. A lot of those values in the STEM disciplines are about competition and individualism. Sort of a verbal debate is prioritized. I often hear about, you know, we do objective science or we do objective work, and setting up some dualities around reason and emotion. And so you might have heard these in sort of other spaces. A lot of like cultural anthropologists talk about these in multiple settings. But just acknowledging the fact that these norms, kind of like Caitlin was saying, do shape how we all interact with each other. And we have to kind of name them to start thinking about how they can be problematic and in what ways, and what we could do to change that. And number 4, diminishing engagement among those who don't fit the norm.
And if I could just add one thing, Melissa, that one thing that people raised at the PI meeting too was, of course, within STEM, the 4 disciplines named within STEM, those all may have cultural norms, do have cultural norms too, depending on whether it's, you know, an organization, academic institution, a lab, whatever it is. But of course, there are disciplinary cultural norms as well.
Yeah. And we can also think about too, like an academic cultural norm. So perhaps some of you sit at universities, there's a particular way you're supposed to interact with people. There's a particular set of behaviors and outcomes that get awarded and promoted and compensated for. But if we're thinking about engaging the public, these might not be norms that they value or even interested in engaging in. So thinking about, like, let's say you're a scientist and you're at an outreach event and a family comes and asks you about what's it like to be a scientist. Just being aware of what you're describing, because you could also be communicating particular cultural norms that people could find alienating. So the brief itself kind of digs into some specific examples. And I know we didn't certainly send it out as homework for you to read ahead of time, but I'm just curious if there's any specific situations that you've encountered in your work where you've definitely noticed that, or if there's a particular area of tension that you've seen with your organization trying to interact with diverse audiences. We wanted to hear some of your thoughts on that in the chat or online. And Rock EDU Science Outreach asks, are we talking about changing STEM norms or communicating STEM norms to others who want to participate so that norms are more explicit and achievable? And of course, anyone's welcome to respond. I think the brief is kind of as a tool to help, professionals learn and critique their own practice, is kind of focused on servicing those norms, and leaves it up for that group to kind of brainstorm, research, investigate ways they might change how they communicate. I came from the after school world, so like there are some programs, I think that they recognize that there's cultural norms, and when they're working with, let's say, minority youth, they make sure to build on their assets and sort of align with youth culture, but they also explicitly teach they explicitly teach those norms of sort of established STEM cultures so that those youth can better integrate if they're going into a professional setting. So I think there's there's multiple dynamics to that.
Just another response to that point is this idea that attention needs to be paid to how people are asked to engage with STEM. As Melissa said, I think that one of the main points of this brief is to surface that there are norms, to have a group of people in an organization or institution talk about whether they recognize any norms, sort of have them be explicit, and as she said, what that leads to in terms of how people design programs, measure their effectiveness, engage people, is kind of dependent on the situation. But it's an acknowledgement that there are or could be norms in a setting, and increasing the number of people who participate in STEM involves recognizing these types of phenomena.
And then Janine is asking about Jeannie.
Yeah. Hi, Jeannie. Yeah. Yeah.
Jeannie's asking about her local science outreach meetup group, framed a conversation around science as a profession versus science as a culture. If we're thinking about science as a profession, is there a field-specific language? And so I guess you're welcome to go on the audio too, Jean.
Yeah.
I think probably there is. I think all of us come from.
It's not a question. I'm not saying that there is field-specific language, right? And I think that's true for any field. It's true for finance. It's true for economics. It's true for architecture. Everybody has their own language, and I'm not sure it's realistic for us to say because we're in ISE or engagement or SciComm that we have to shed the language that helps us run our field, right? But then there are these clear disconnects because the whole purpose of our field is to get more people involved in STEM. So I think, I don't know, I thought that this was really insightful when she said this, that it was you could think about it in two ways, thinking about STEM as a profession or STEM outreach, the stuff that we do as our profession, but really what we want to think about when we're doing the engagement is science as a culture. And so I don't know, I guess I feel a little bit, it's just feels a little daunting to me to think about, having to adjust our entire practice to when it's really thinking about the culture instead. And So I don't know. It's just something I thought was worth adding to the conversation, and I don't have an answer to this at all. I'm thinking about it very hard, but I think if we had an answer to it, we wouldn't be needing all of the work that we're doing, right? So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, and I think if I just put the link to the brief itself in the chat, and I think, you know, we're developing these, again, like it's about servicing those problems. I think what also we're looking for from the field next is like, do you have, like, has your team come up with some solutions, or, you know, can you take this and, you know, bring examples back so we can create, you know, more of a database so others can learn from each other. I think some of the sort of easier things that people, that we've heard from our, I guess, audiences are, you know, just changing the types of topics that you highlight to be something that's like relevant towards the community you're trying to speak with. So choosing something that's not just important to the scientists or engineers, but framing that in a way, or choosing something different that's relevant to the community. And I think, you know, just the language of, and I don't mean to say jargon, like, you know, negatively, but I think a lot of our words, when we are communicating, can be jargon, and it's not that we eliminate it totally, but we're just conscious of providing like clear and concise examples. In the sense that, right, like language is powerful, both to describe like phenomena experiences for human beings, but also when we're talking about like specific scientific processes or concepts. So the solution also could just be more definitions and onboarding.
I was at AZA recently, and I learned a new term called jargon monoxide.
Tell us more.
Well, it's just a clever way of saying it will kill whatever you're trying to communicate if you get into too much jargon.
I think the idea of starting a conversation, if you look at the titles of these briefs, they're really tools to get conversations started among professionals who really truly want to think as broadly as possible about broadening participation. And what we've seen in piloting these up to now, and that was prior to the PI meeting and particularly at the PI meeting, and feedback we've gotten, and just observing, is that people use them in very different ways. They may just start with people use them in very different ways. As you know, sometimes they'll just use the term cultural norms as starts a whole conversation, and people don't even look at the piece of paper. Or, you know, asset-based approaches, or you know, learning and science communication, the relationship between those two. Sometimes just seeing that concept and the title of the brief catalyzes people to have a useful conversation, and that's their main purpose. But we have been you know, attentive to also linking to resources in each brief that may be additionally useful, some of which are, you know, research in the area and or other tools that others are using. And as Melissa said, we're very interested in what others are doing, and just trying to add value to a lot of work that's happening across the fields in broadening participation.
And then just highlighting that Kevin and Tricia had an exchange about the tension in robotics between competition and cooperation. Do either of you want to say a little bit more about that verbally?
Well, I could. I was waiting for Tricia because I'm about to talk now anyway, but the cultural norms sometimes get confused with the necessary. I really respect the comment earlier about how there is a discourse in science, there are norms in science, and that's part of the discipline. But we've also just brought a lot of baggage with us, and like the idea of a competition as a way for people to innovate is something that's baked into a lot of robotics. And that doesn't appeal. Like Trish was saying, a lot of the girls they're working with apparently in their program, they don't see themselves as STEM people if STEM people means I have to be part of a competitive culture where teams win and lose. And so I see it a lot in robotics But I think that permeates a lot of different areas of science engagement. And so particularly around gender identity and broadening participation, I just think we need to be aware of how our designs reflect the actual science versus the culture that we may be implicitly bringing along from our own experiences and training in labs.
Thanks, Tim.
Kevin, if you have, since you have the floor, if you want to go ahead with talking about the construct pieces.
Sure, Jamie. Can I have a time check? You wanted me to do this a little more briefly, correct?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I guess we have 15 minutes left, right?
Okay. So also in the PI meeting this year, now we're on to slide 25. We ran a session where we have developed tools in CAISE as part of another task force, the Evaluation and Measurement Task Force, around these questions of what is STEM interest, identity, and engagement. And if you go to slide 26, the problem we were wrestling with here is we heard in a lot of our pre-work a call from science communication and also from informal science education for measures, outcome measures, common measures of things that, for instance, the National Science Foundation likes to fund. And there's a tension there. There has been a lot of work and there have been measures developed, but our task force that we assembled started thinking about the idea of responsible use of measurements. If people are just pulling surveys off the web for identity or interest and not really understanding the history of where they come from or how those surveys reflect research and theory on why those are important constructs, we could get into a place as a field where the cart's really starting to lead the horse, where the measurements determine what we think of as these constructs. So what the task force decided to do was to, instead of putting forth common measures, to start shining a light on where these common constructs of interest came from and what is the theory behind them. So Melissa, am I supposed to click on this little play thing today? Will that work for me? It will not work. Okay, so let's go to slide 27. And that'll give you an example of what you can find on the CAISE website if you go to, for instance, this is the engagement page. And what our process was is we found prominent voices in the field who had been worried about the questions of what is engagement, what is interest, what is identity. And we conducted interviews with them from 30 to 60 minutes where we took them through a common set of questions and asked them, how do you define that? How is your work focused on that? Where are we going in a field with respect to this construct? And where are we at with the technology for measuring this construct? How confident are we that we can construct evaluation and research instruments that measure it with validity, not just construct validity, but also what we really mean in theory and what we really mean in practice. And so if you click on these pages, and let's go to slide 28, I've got another one there for STEM identity. You can see a video, which is an excerpt, the greatest hits of what they said. You can read the full transcript, and then we have linked resources as well that help you explore the work of these scholars and practitioners more deeply. Let's go to slide 29, just so you can get a sense of some of the people we looked at, talked to for interest. And then also for each of these three constructs on the right of this slide, we put together a synthesis statement which can serve as an overview for the different perspectives that were represented in our interviews. So we see these resources as useful to folks developing projects who want to have a introduction to these constructs in the field. We see them interested for practitioners who are also looking to learn a little bit more about these things they've heard about or these outcomes they've been asked to measure. And we see them interested for students, people entering the field, and maybe some colleagues who are coming from other parts of the field to focus on science communication and science education, because they provide this kind of immediate snapshot of the debate in the field and the different perspectives around these constructs. So if you go to slide 30, we also have a research and practice task force. We have some members from that task force on the call today as well, I noticed. And the research and practice task force helped to create moments at the CAISE PI meeting where we, as a community, wrestled with the tools from the broadening participation and the evaluation and measurement task force. And they'll be the ones, this research and practice task force, and here's the members of that, who will help us now think about how we can continue to develop these tools and help get them into circulation in the field. And so with that, Jamie, in the interest of time, maybe we can just go to slide 32 and you can take us home.
Okay. Right. So those are the main aspects of the meeting that we thought would be perhaps interesting to you all as an audience. As I said, there's ways to follow up on the resources and the discussions that happened there or were launched there via the page for the PI meeting on informalscience.org. And in terms of where we're going next, in addition to what Kevin just shared about the Research and Practice Task Force, certainly these areas where we've begun producing some products and tools that people can use, as they are in the world now and people are using them, piloting them, trying them out, we're already getting lots of feedback about how and if and where they are useful, what we might do going forward to create new tools. We, again, with an overall charge of connecting the fields more, this meeting the timing of this meeting was chosen this time to precede AAAS, the AAAS annual meeting, which began the day after the PI meeting and allowed for some people from the AISL community who would not normally have gone to AAAS to have the opportunity to go because they were in town anyway. And there were a number of sessions that AAAS sponsored and led during the Communicating Science Seminar Day on Thursday the 14th of February, which addressed various aspects of some of the issues that both fields are grappling with around broadening participation, around the current state of connectivity between research and practice and what it could be. And so with the theme also of boundary crossing for this year's AAAS meeting, we saw it as the beginning of more, what we hope will be more opportunities to connect the fields via professional meetings, via workshops that involve members of both communities. And we really were appreciative of the opportunity to work with AAAS in this way in terms of planning and encouraging that participation across the meetings. I don't know, Emily, if you want to say anything about that, but we were definitely very grateful to AAAS for AAAS's help and encouragement in doing the meeting this way this time.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Really quickly, I think we definitely saw folks from the NSF AISL PI meeting who came at least for that first day of the science communication seminar. And then I think we also were able to have some really good discussions that had started at the AISL PI meeting and sort of bled into the conversations that we had during that seminar and throughout the meeting. So I think it was a nice way to sort of kick off thinking among folks who are sort of going back and forth between the two groups.
I would like to, unless we should leave some time for some questions, because it looks like we're almost out of time. So the only other thing to say is, you know, the slides will be available, and there's, as Melissa said, there's some other slides that we didn't share that contain more detailed information about the task forces, with some links to some pages that are specifically designed to list resources that connect the fields in ways that we hope will be useful. So let's see if there's other questions that people want to ask in the remaining time, or comments. We welcome any.
Just a practical question. I'm on the documentation page for the meeting, and I'm seeing links to slides, but I'm not seeing any of the toolkits or resources. What am I missing?
Yeah, so our meeting documentation is actually, we've got a couple of videos of the keynote and highlight reel. The slides that are on that page are just the concurrent session summaries. And the text on the page is just some general summaries. There's also a blog linked there of Jamie's recap. It's a good point that I think that the items we just mentioned about the what is interest, identity, engagement, and the Brian participation stuff is not linked there. So I just put those two in the chat separately. Also, if you go to our homepage, they're on our highlight boxes as well. So those are our separate initiatives.
And the links to those are also in the slides.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking, if I'm trying to send people, you know, faculty that I work with, to look at some of these resources, it'd be great if there was some place where you could just find them.
Right, and probably the easiest thing to do is just go to the informalscience.org webpage, homepage, and in the bottom flex boxes, the two on the left have links to both those sets of resources we just talked about. The toolkit and the identity, interest, and engagement on the homepage of informalscience.org at the bottom.
Okay.
And the blog that I just put in the chat is Jamie's recap of the PI meeting, and that does link to everything. Although there's lots of links to dig through.
Yeah, to dig through, right. Okay, I see the broadening perspectives, broadening participation, and the STEM identity. Okay, so the rest you just have to dig for.
And we're always open to, we get a lot of input about how to help to find things better. We're always working on that. So if you have any trouble with finding anything, you can always write to us, CAISE@informalscience.org. As we are now in the season leading up to another AISL deadline for proposals to the AISL program in November, we will start ramping up activities of support for those efforts. If you have an Advancing Informal STEM Learning program project in the works, and you're seeking more information about responding to the solicitation, NSF priorities and directions, we will be supporting that in a more proactive way going forward, as we always do in this season, and with some webinars that are already recorded by the program officers, some office hours that we typically do in the months just prior to the deadline. So if you're in that space of creating a proposal, we certainly want to do whatever we can do to help support you.
And yeah, I just put our contact info in the chat, so definitely reach out if you have thoughts or want to be connected to any of the people thinking about these things. And the easiest way to get our news is through our monthly newsletter, which will go out next Wednesday for April. And I think Elise dropped off, but last month's SciEngage webinar, Elise wrote a blog for us as well. We have some new content there. All right. Well, thank you. I guess we'll hang out for a few minutes if anyone else wants to chat.
There, Elise Arbach is still there. Hi, Elise. And for those of you who joined last month, she gave a great presentation on public engagement framework that's being developed in Michigan, and highly recommend that archive of that also.
So to wrap up, I just give a few minutes to Emily and then to Julie and or Ben, because they have upcoming announcements to make. And then if anybody else has anything, feel free to share it. So Emily first and then Julie.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. So I'm going to put a couple things in the chat box too. AAIS is currently accepting applications for a new program called the AAIS If Then Ambassadors. So we're looking for 100 women in STEM from all sorts of STEM disciplines, STEM fields, careers, career stages. And we are going to be doing some fun stuff. So ambassadors will get training in science communication and engagement, media, diversity, inclusion, STEM ed, and we'll be working with them to place them in a variety of engagement activities, including media opportunities that reach middle school girls, classroom and informal STEM ed, and public engagement. And so please spread the word. Let people you know that might be good applicants know that they should apply. Applications are open through July 21. We're going to do a first round of selection on applications we receive by May 15, and then another round with whatever applications come in by July 21. So please spread the word. Please promote it. Yes. Promote, promote, promote. We would love it. And any questions, just drop me a line. I'll put my email address in here. So thanks.
Cool. Julie or Ben, you guys want to say anything about the Science Event Summit? Are they still there? Oh. Guess they left. Anybody else have anything to add? I will say that we will be doing the next SciEngage meeting on May 17th, and we'll be talking with folks from the Kavli Foundation, who in the past year and a half or so have led a series of small meetings looking at sort of big picture public engagement, public outreach efforts. So we'll get a summary from them. And we are always interested in topics and feedback on this format. So if you have something you'd like to share, you want a topic, feel free to reach out to me or Emily, and we can take it from there. And then if there's nothing else, then I'll just say thank you and see you next month. Thanks to Jamie and Melissa and Kevin.
Thank you, Jeff. And just to say real quickly, the SciEvent Summit 2019, June 3rd to 5th. We're doing this for Ben and Julie.
Okay.
Which will be in San Diego this year. And you can find it on the Science Festival Alliance website. You can find it on the CAISE website calendar. And there's a SciEvent. I can't remember the SciEvents page right now.
Yeah. And if you want to, their call for proposals closes today. So if you want to go and are interested in doing something, check out their website, and then you have like 6 more hours left.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.